Hello and welcome to another episode of Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, your host, and we're back with another interview, this time with author Tessa Wardley, who is the author of the recently released The Eco Hero Handbook, and also of The Mindful Art of Wild Swimming and Mindful Thoughts for Runners, Freedom on the Trail, her previous books. But we called her and asked her to talk to us about the Eco Hero Handbook, which is about making small changes to make a big difference in the world. Tessa, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Hi, I'm very well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, it was a pleasure, and to read your book. I want to first start with the concept of EcoAnxiety, which you address in the title. First, what motivated you to write about eco-anxiety, and how do you feel that it shapes the discussion that we have about sustainability?
Well, we are fairly definitely in a bit of a global crisis at the moment in terms of biodiversity and climate change. And I think so much of what we hear in the media and all around us is doom and gloom, all the negative side of what's going on, and, how everything's going to end in 12 years. And I think the trouble with that is that we get very negative messaging, and people end up having a feeling of helplessness and a kind of, what can I do? I can't do anything. And they get kind of paralyzed, and they get very anxious about what's going on around them. I have children who are at school age, and I know quite a few of their friends are suffering from, quite paralyzing anxiety about the future of our planet. And I felt that it would be really useful, with the experience and my background, to be able to say to people that there are things we can do. We can make changes. It will take all of us. We all need to do this, but it will make a change. And gathering that kind of control over our lives can actually help to still some of that anxiety and calm us down and make for actually more positive action.
Well, we certainly agree. That is why we write what we do every day. Now, we recently spoke with Dr. Erica Dodds. She's with the Foundation for Climate Restoration, but she specializes in, amongst other things, eco-anxiety. And she called out the fact that that paralyzing fear also can be combined with the perceived green premium that Bill Gates recently pointed out as well as a blocker to progress. Do a lot of people feel when they're experiencing this anxiety that they can't take the steps that they want to because it's beyond their economic ability?
I think sometimes that can be the case. But actually, I think part of the point of most of what I talk about in my book is that it's simple changes. We're not talking about buying electric vehicles. We're maybe talking about driving more efficiently. And actually, those kind of things will actually save your pocket. You're actually going to save money if you drive more efficiently or drive less. Mm-hmm. Take the bike, travel by train. You're going to be saving on your carbon footprint, but you're actually saving money as well. There are lots and lots of ways that you can save on your carbon footprint and improve biodiversity that actually will save you money as well. So it can be a win-win situation. It doesn't have to be more expensive choices in life.
Well, let's talk a little about your background, because you say that from the perspective of your job, which is for the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs in the United Kingdom's Department of the Environment. This notion of a lot of small changes, do you feel like, having studied this so carefully and worked in policy for so long, that individual changes do add up to something that really does start to change the world? And where do you think the levers are for people to amplify that?
I think it's going to take every sector of society to make changes for it to really make a difference to the planet. But and I think that includes governments and institutions and businesses, but it also requires us as individuals to make changes. And one of the most powerful things that we as individuals can do is to demonstrate to governments and institutions and businesses that it matters to us. Our consumer power is actually really, really powerful, and I think we shouldn't underestimate that. And also in our places of employment and how we choose our jobs, there are some really big global businesses that are making big changes in approaching sustainability, and they're actually finding that they have the pick of the upcoming generation, because the younger generation tend to be quite purpose-led. And if they see that a business is taking social and environmental responsibility, then they're more inclined to apply for jobs there. So actually some of the really big corporations that have a really strong corporate sustainability responsibility focus are finding that they actually have the pick of the talent for their jobs. And I think those kinds of things are really, really powerful. And we maybe don't realise that as consumers, what power we have over those businesses and the big corporations.
It's interesting. We have two facets of that economic influence. One is our ability to put our work to certain projects, and the other is to spend our money on things that are sustainable.
Absolutely, yeah. And if we consistently make choices for the more sustainable options, then businesses will begin to realise, and I think that does happen. I think people are making choices over their holidays, their vehicles, their food, their clothing, and businesses are beginning to realise that actually, and as you say, sometimes there is a premium to that they can make more money maybe by making their products greener. But there's definitely, things are changing to recognise the consumer needs and desires.
Yeah, well, certainly at the minimum, if they make those changes, they'll continue to sell things as compared to have people ignore their products and choose greener alternatives. That's for sure. Mm-hmm. Now, let me ask, in your work for DEFRA, the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, you focus a lot on biodiversity and policy around biodiversity. But are there any lessons that you take away from that work that you suggest individuals can apply to support their own local biodiversity?
Yeah, there's all sorts of things that we can do to improve our local environment. In really close to home, there are things that we can do in our gardens. And if we don't have gardens, window boxes, and, actually you can grow some really good plants just right in your garden and on your window box that will encourage pollinators and insects. I've worked with a British entomologist who's very passionate about insects, and he talks often about the insect Armageddon that we're facing. And insects are the quite low down in the food chain, and we really need to look after them, because if we don't have the pollinators, then everything else above that kind of comes crumbling down and our food supply suffers. And actually just in our gardens, we can make a huge difference. The additive of our small patch across citywide is a huge area that can have a big influence.
Now, so just as a matter of example, what kind of gardening choices do you make to encourage your local pollinators?
Well, on a slightly different note, probably one of the biggest things we can make sure we do is not use peat in our gardens. But aside from that, if you have a variety of plants that will flower throughout the year, then you'll make sure you have a constant supply of nectar for your pollinators. The other things that you can do is make sure you have messy areas, which is a great excuse as far as I'm concerned. Have messy areas that the insects and small animals can hide away in. Bees can, if you have sort of piles of tiles, broken tiles and things like that, and wood piles, bees and other insects can make their homes there. And the other thing you can do is, if you have flowering plants, it's very tempting once the flowers die to take the heads off. If you leave them and allow the seed heads to develop, then that's really good winter food for birds. So there's lots of things you can do in your garden, and on top of that, in a more sort of systemic approach, not using chemicals, is another big one.
So do you also encourage people to be aware of what their local pollinators might need? For instance, here in the States, you can plant milkweed, but there are specific milkweeds that monarch butterflies will feed on. Is that something that people need to be mindful of, is choosing for their locality?
Yeah, even better if you can find out what the particular species you have in your area and what they like, then yeah, absolutely, all the better. On the whole, if you stick to native plants, then they will be the ones that native insects will enjoy. If you grow a lot of exotic plants, it's quite likely that you don't have those insects in your locality that are going to be able to make the most of them. So if you stick to native plants, that's a simple way of probably encouraging the local native insect population.
Well, now your new book, the Eco Hero Handbook, has a lot of, it's a short and easy read, but full of really useful ideas about how to reduce plastic in the bathroom, reduce your emissions from taking flights and so forth. What are the 5 things that you would suggest to somebody who's really feeling the grip of eco-anxiety right now should do to break out?
I would probably look at the food that I eat, and most importantly, the food that I don't eat. So food waste is a huge drain. It produces a huge carbon footprint. Interestingly, during COVID in London, when we were locked down and not supposed to be, going out as little as possible, the food waste reduced by about 1/3. And I don't know if similar things happened in American cities, but yeah, and I think that's really interesting, just by a bit of extra thought and not wanting to go to the shop so much. People are actually producing such a large reduction in their food waste. And, I think that's fascinating that we can do that with just a bit of extra thought. Similarly, clothing, again, clothing waste, and, the way we use fashion and crack through our clothing is quite insane. I have 4 daughters. Sorry.
Would you look for more durable clothing as a solution to that, and just buy less? How would you go about that?
Yeah. Well, I think there are different things, aren't they? Probably for different people of different generations. So I have 4 daughters. They're very fashion aware, and they're not going to probably wear the same thing for a huge amount of time, but they've become very conscious, and they actually rarely buy anything new now. There's a lot of online sort of sharing sites and resale sites, so they nearly always buy pre-loved, pre-worn clothes, and then they sell on the clothes that they've decided they don't need anymore. Someone of my, a bit older, when your fashion sense changes less regularly, then I would say, yeah, buy less and enjoy it more. And that might mean maybe spending a bit more money on something that's going to be durable and is going to last and you're really going to enjoy. But there's also, lots of opportunities for clothes sharing parties and things like that, rather than, just moving on and putting it in the bin.
And so that's food waste, and thinking about our clothing. What are a couple of others?
Yeah, so transport is another really big area that I think a lot of us can probably make changes in. Do we need to use the car as much as we do? Could we walk? Could we cycle? Then you're getting double whammy, because you're getting a health and well-being benefits, as well as saving on your carbon footprint. If you have to use the car, there's very often ways you can reduce the amount of fuel that you're using, maybe by more careful driving, maintaining your vehicles better, reducing the amount of junk you carry around in your car, maybe roof boxes and things that you're not actually using at the time.
The load. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Now, do you encourage people to use public transportation, or is public transportation also part of the carbon problem?
It's definitely going to be more efficient if people are using public transport, then and very often the public transport, certainly in the UK, there's a big move towards more electric vehicles. I think nearly all the buses in London are now electrified. And so they tend to be, possibly moving towards a lower carbon footprint. And definitely if, trains and long distance trains, as opposed to flying, would be a better option. So, at every stage, I think it's just being aware and being a bit more thoughtful about the choices that you're making. And probably the final one I would say is energy in the home. Just turn that heating down a notch in turn your thermostat down a notch in summer and up a notch in the other way around, up a notch in summer and down a notch in winter, can make a big difference to your fuel and energy needs and consumption, which again will save you money. So that's a double win-win
Absolutely.
Situation there.
Although the notches are more extreme these days, it seems like, because of the weather. If we fix that, then we won't have to use as much power to.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah.
So you mentioned awareness in making your decisions as shopper. How do you keep up on what is sustainable or more sustainable? How do you vet your choices?
I think that's one of the big challenges, isn't it, for everyone, is where do you get your information and where do you get information that you trust? I think one of the ways you can go about shopping is to identify certain brands maybe, or certain shops that you know are making good choices and they're essentially making those choices for you. So there are lots of online resources. Obviously your own organisation provides good information and, trustworthy information on recycling and where you can recycle. And there are ethical consumer websites that will allow you to help make choices. I get a lot of my food from a organic farming company, and I know that they're doing their very, very best and to reduce all their packaging, reduce their transport mileage, food mileage. So if you can simplify the process for yourself by identifying those businesses that are making those choices, you can simplify your own consumer choices as well. So
let me ask, just in terms of hopefulness, where do you see us being in 2030? Because this year is such a pivotal year for climate overall. Where do you think we're headed?
Well, I think I fluctuate from positivity to not positivity.
A little eco-anxiety, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think I have a lot of hope. This year, it's a really pivotal time, as you say. I'm hopeful that, this is a moment of flux, I think, and COVID, is absolutely desperate, but possibly it does provide us with an opportunity to think a little bit about some of those choices as we sort of rebuild. There are some key moments coming up in terms of the United Nations COP26 debates at the end of the year. And, for us in the UK, seeing that the US are back in those discussions, that's a really positive move. There's a lot of governments making big claims and big statements. And if they are kept to and achieved, then I feel there is more hope.
That's great to hear. And, we've talked with a number of the scientists who are contributing to those reports, and many of them are expressing more optimism than I actually expected. So it's been encouraging to speak with them and to speak with you. Now, the Eco Hero Handbook, Simple Solutions to Tackle Eco-Anxiety, is available on Amazon and barnesandnoble.com. You can also find it on Goodreads. I'd also urge you to check out Tessa's previous books, which include the River Book, the Woodland Book, and the Countryside Book. I want to thank you for joining us today, Tessa.
Thank you. It's been really, really fun talking to you.
Well, folks, check out Tessa's book, the Eco Hero Handbook, Simple Solutions to Tackle Eco-Anxiety. We'll have a link in the article that goes with this podcast, of course. This is Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, and we will be back soon with another innovator interview. So everybody take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's take care of the planet.